had a really rough weekend. This is not my normal voice, but please understand. Um, as Julian, as Julian pointed out, I have been hired by the Data Institute. I work in the work package number 1, so data science for Earth, space, and environmental sciences. Um, and I'm going to talk about exoplanets, image processing, and machine learning. So let's first start with this. It's my own spin of a Venn diagram for data science, and it will serve also as the outline of the presentation. So let's first agree. I will just skip the whole definition of what data science is, so this over-abused term, but let's agree just that it contains these 4 different components, right? Domain knowledge, programming, computer science, statistics, machine learning, and also an important part, which is communication of ideas and team skills. So let's move forward to explore what in my case is the domain knowledge, right? So exoplanets. It shouldn't be a mystery for anyone that there are thousands of planets around other stars. So after 30 years of discovering exoplanets, we know that only in our galaxy there are billions of other planets. There is a large variety in terms of physical conditions, right? Sizes, masses, composition. But unfortunately, this is just an artistic representation. We cannot image exoplanets because they are really hard to see, and mostly we rely on indirect detection methods. In my case, I am pushing forward the technique which is acquiring photons directly from the exoplanets, and this is a nice analogy of what detecting an exoplanet means around other stars than ours. It's like being 1 kilometer away from a firehouse and trying to detect and trying to take a picture of a firefly just flying around this lighthouse. But with the difference that our stars, they never shut down. So that's the very problem, right? That this signal is really buried there in the glare of the star. So we rely on using the largest telescopes on Earth. In this case, this is the Very Large Telescope owned by ESO, and it's located in Chile. And this is actually what's inside one of these towers, which is one of the telescopes, and we put this instruments. In this case, this is sphere, heavy developed by the university here. And so we use infrared detectors, we use special devices, optical devices. And yes, so this is just to give you, this is a nice animation of what's happening when the light enters our telescope, which type of optical devices we put in the optical path to try to block or to dim the light from the parent star. So we put something called a coronagraph, right, to try to block most of the on-axis light, which is the star that we are pointing to, and also we use a technique called adaptive optics, which is using deformable mirrors to try to correct the wavefront of the light, which is affected by the turbulence in the atmosphere. And all of these technologies, they allow to detect this signal, this off-axis signal, which is the light from the disks of planets around the stars. Um, so from the observations of raw images coming from the telescope to final images where we can actually see planets, there is a fair amount of image processing. And just to give you more detail, this is a very long pipeline of operations to come from these noisy images, sequence of images, so we apply calibration procedures, which are very common for all astronomical data. And we arrive to this sequence of calibrated images, and from here we can do what is called post-processing. We try to model the coronographic PSF. So that's the remaining light of the star and the associated noise pattern. We try to remove that. And then to combine the residuals, so we subtract the model, combine the residuals to get a final image, and we try to do detection on there and characterize the detected companions. Now, there is something very, very important, which is in 15 years of this whole domain, which is called high contrast imaging, we have detected only less than 1% of the known exoplanets. Today we know almost 4,000 exoplanets, but we have observed only a dozen of them. So this is definitely, this post-processing is what ultimately pushes the sensitivity of the instruments. But we need to do better. And I will show you why. So in this slide, we have two animations, and it's the same data set. Here's just a zoom in of this central area. So this is the same data set. I have injected synthetic planets just to illustrate what the problem is about. It will start moving from here in this circular pattern, which is not the Keplerian motion, is not the physical rotation of the planet around the star. This is due to the way we observe, we use the telescope. This is caused by the rotation of the Earth. But it introduces variability, right? So you see also these spots, and this is called speckle noise. So let's take a look, or not. Okay, so now this is the sequence of images with time, and you see how there is a spot here moving. So this is a really unrealistically bright planet, just for illustration, right? So it will be moving here, and there are a lot of these speckles which mimic in size and in brightness the signal we're interested in. But usually we don't get to see an exoplanet in the images, so we have to process them somehow to try to get the signal we're looking for. And this is one of the lucky cases where we have been able to detect exoplanets. And this is a really nice example. It's a system with 4 exoplanets. So this is one result of one of those sequences, and this is over many years. So this is several epochs, many teams gathering data and processing that to get a sequence of these images. So, okay. And here we are, in fact, seeing the Keplerian motion, so the rotation of the planets around the star. And we can get all sort of information from this. We can do a spectroscopy and to grab the properties of the atmospheres of these planets. We can see what's the dynamics, what's the architecture of the whole system. We can also try to enhance the models of evolution of the planetary system. So doing direct imaging of exoplanets is really, really important. Now, let's go to the programming part. So at the beginning of my thesis, I had this task, right? So there were a bunch of closed source packages for doing these image processing steps, right? and I was faced with the task of creating my own, and I had to choose a tool. My tool was Python, so I saw that it has a really vast open source scientific stack, and it has also a very gentle learning curve. So I went this road, and I created my own package for doing high contrast imaging, for doing image processing for the detection of exoplanets. It's called VIP, and I tried to mimic, to be inspired by what these open source renowned projects are doing. So, which means it's available on PyPy. It can be installed with just one simple command. It's documented. It uses control version systems. In this case, Git. So this is allocated on GitHub. It uses bug tracking, and there is interaction with developers and users. It uses continuous integration. It's compatible with the previous and the current version of Python, automated testing, and ultimately it enables to, from one dataset, have different views of what a final image would be. So this is the same dataset with 2 injected companions, and these are almost all of the state-of-the-art algorithms proposed in the literature. So I took that effort of coding all of that in one single library. Of course, I also started to develop my own algorithms. So if you see PCA appears here as kind of the de facto nowadays for reasons that it's really easy to compute and it's really easy to understand. So we are looking for a low-rank approximation of our sequence of images to model that remaining light and noise, and we subtract that to get residuals that we can combine in a single image. So I took ideas from computer vision. They were using low-rank plus sparse decompositions to model video sequences, to try to do background subtraction. So this is all, this algorithmic zoo is possible thanks to VIP and open source development, right? And the good thing is that there are these environments, for example, Jupyter Lab. So I started to use this with my colleagues. I started to show how these workflows can be reproduced, can be shared, can be, so this ultimately leads to this idea of open science and reproducibility, which is what we should do, right? I don't want to hear preach about what we should do, but this is a really nice movement in modern science. And here are 2 really nice quotes that I like, especially the second, where they compare software, scientific software, to what the telescope was for Galileo. So scientific software is a tool combining science and engineering. It lies outside the central field of principal competence among the researchers that rely on it. And it builds upon scientific progress and shapes our scientific vision. So I cannot agree more with that. But with a great power comes also a great burden. So as it was said, this is not the core competence for a scientist, right? And so it's about developing, maintaining open source software, and this is not trivial. And comes also a great responsibility to make sure that the code is correct, that it's readable, so it can be projected into the future. It can be developed by other people. It's free of bugs, and it's well documented. Here are really nice references for computer practices for developing scientific software. Now, what about ML and stats? So let's come back to the problem of the detection. So we want to, in this sequence of images, we want to ultimately see what's moving here around. We want to find this blob, which is it's a real exoplanet. So we produce these final images, and then basically what we do is to have a graduate students to take a look at the images and decide what is a signal or not, and use some sort of metric, for example, the signal to noise metric, right? So this is a really hard to automate task. Of course, it carries all the biases of the human perception, and that's something that I identified. That's something I could improve on. Again, just to illustrate, what is the problem with this modeling of the images, right? In this case, let's use PCA and let's try to model that. Let's try to use more principal components, and you see that there is a trade-off between the reduction of the noise and the signal that you get from the planet. So this is obviously the signal of the planet is subtracted in, so it's it gets carried inside the model and is subtracted. So it hurts also the sensitivity, right? So how many true companions we can detect. And here again, two really nice quotes. This is a very known one, right? That all models are wrong, but some are useful. And then this idea that we can set computers to compute the models for us instead of us deriving the model from a lot of thought. And let's see how that works. And here, just a textbook machine learning slide in a nutshell. We come from this sort of learning paradigm where we have a sequence of images with no labels whatsoever. We just have these images, and we have to come with some of interesting insights, right? So what we do is to find this low dimensional space where we can project our images, reconstruct them, and then use that to subtract from the original images. But we can pose a problem also in a different way. What we want to do per pixels is to do a binary classification to say whether we have a signal or not. And for that, okay, so just to give, again, what I was saying, this is the old paradigm. We model and we subtract to get a residual final image, or we can think of using our noisy and unlabeled images to do data transformation and to use machine learning to get a prediction, right? So here, using what already was explained before, supervised learning. So by using examples, we can train a model to do these predictions. And of course, so this is a disruptive technology, right? So using these successions of linear and no linearity operations, we can build these really complex functions to map our labels to our samples. And so yeah, I won't spend more time here, but I would rather show you what I have proposed. So how to come from a sequence of images, how to rely on understanding the problem, how to do a proper data transformation, how to grab patches from this sequence of images. We use the SVD Low-rank approximation at several k values, so by truncating the singular vectors, and then we produce these samples that we can label. So thanks to the fact that we can inject planets, we can inject the signal, we can create positive and negative samples, and then train a model, right? And then do inference. With the learned model, we can have probability or a prediction afterwards. Just to give you a little bit more of details of what happens there. So I'm using, again, this is the old math that we were using before for computing SVD to do a low rank approximation of the images, and the idea is that here we will explore, we will truncate at several locations. So in fact, what we are doing is to try to map how the signal, the true signal, behaves as we increase the aggressiveness of the SVD modeling, right? And then we can create these two classes, right? Grabbing patches from the original dataset, but using, again, the knowledge about the datasets. We don't actually use the patches from the dataset, but we use a flip sign rotation. So this is important because we don't want to overfit our dataset. And then here, of course, we use the fact that we can inject the signal. And then we can create these samples with the associated labels and to train a discriminative model. So I explored a classic ensemble of trees, and then a special kind of neural network where I use convolutional LSTM layers. And this is an architecture that exploits temporal and spatial dependencies. And then what we ultimately do once we have trained our classifier, so we have trained the weights of our neural network, we pass again the initial cube, and we produce for each pixel probability, right? And this is a known dataset. This is the one I showed you at the beginning with an animation from several epochs. Okay, this is the one. So this is a good sanity check, right? If I can apply this to a known dataset and I have this, well, that's a good sign. But then what we ultimately want to do is to assess the performance of these models, right? We want to, in our particular case, what we want to do is to maximize the true positive rate while minimizing the false positive. Why? Because observing in these super expensive telescopes with this very state-of-the-art hardware, it's really expensive. So to get allocated time in these instruments is really expensive. So it's hard to really go and chase them for false positives. So we want this sort of classifier. Let's see if that's the case. So we use statistics or signal detection theory metrics, in this case ROC curves, receiver operating characteristic curves, to assess the performance of our binary classifiers. And the important point here to see is that the closer we are to this corner, the better. And this is the neural network, and it totally lies in a different region of this parameter space. So it can really improve the sensitivity, the true positive rate, how many injected companions we were able to recover. And finally, of course, this was possible by not reinventing the wheel, but by relying on GPUs, on the whole Python open source scientific stack, and all the fact that VAP existed, and then all the frameworks for doing deep learning. And finally, the last point, right? Communication. So hopefully this presentation was a good example of how to present a complex topic to a broad audience, I hope. And then there are other questions here, right? So this open data science or academic data science is about cross and interdisciplinary research, and it implies this interaction, human interaction, right, in the end. because we want to collaborate with researchers from computer science, from machine learning and AI fields to integrate cutting-edge developments into what we do, right, into the hard science. And also we want to ensure that we use robust statistical approaches and well-suited metrics. Perhaps we need to learn more what people from computer science do, these open peer-reviewed systems. Ultimately, the idea is that we need more of these pie-shaped researchers, right? That have, so in a T-shaped classic researcher, you have a well-developed branch, which is the domain specialty. But here in the pie-shaped, you have this domain knowledge, but also the stats and computing, right? And then it's about releasing code and supporting data, really important. Publishing code. So, and for that there are, I just cite here 2 of the journals that I know of where you can publish code about knowledge sharing and creating data challenges. For that, it's important also to learn what other fields have done, which is the creation of benchmark datasets. And it's a chance to transform science ultimately, right? But there are challenges. So interdisciplinarity is not trivial, right? It's an expertise that isn't yet properly recognized. Maybe the metrics and the assessment mechanisms for promotion are still inadequate for young researchers who want to go into this with this interdisciplinary mindset. There are no clear paths or protocols for actually establishing collaborations. So usually for a scientist in the astrophysical lab, computation is just an afterthought. That's not something they will invest a lot of time, right? And for some methodologists, the applications are also an afterthought. So that's something to think about. It is often not trivial to navigate and integrate knowledge from a diverse set of disciplines. Well, and yeah, the never-ending imposter syndrome, that's also a challenge here. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say, and thank you. Listen, friends.